Okay, welcome everyone to the third Private Client Podcast, and our first one with a guest. And I'm really excited about who we've got today. So we're going to be speaking to Philip Grindell. He's had an absolutely fascinating career. I'll give you a short potted history. He spent 4 years in the Grenadier Guards, followed by just under 30 years as a detective inspector at the Met Police. I'm sure we're going to talk about that, but there was various parts of it, including parliamentary investigations team and counterterrorism. After a long career with the Met, you set up, in 2019, you set up your business, Defuse Global. I'm really interested to hear how that went. And as if you didn't have enough to do, you've also got the Online Bodyguard podcast. Philip, really glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to the Private Client Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
So we can go back as far as you'd like. I mean, I'd love to hear the story of your career. You know, how did you always want to join the sort of military when you were younger? Did you always have an eye on the police like afterwards? How did your career start, if you don't mind going with that?
I think what's really interesting is over the last, I suppose, 3, 4 or 5 years since I've been out of those worlds and into the corporate world, people talk to me very often around finding your purpose. And, when you're talking about building a business, is, you find your purpose and understand your purpose and your legacy and all those sort of things, which are really interesting debates. When I've done that, what's really become apparent to me is that from a very, very young age, I followed a purpose that I didn't consciously really know was there. And so without kind of getting too into the kind of weeds of stuff, sort of slightly dysfunctional, problematic childhood, but very close to my sisters, something within me became quite protective. And that clearly had has been one of the driving forces of my life, often unconsciously. So, why did I join the army? Well, possibly because I was at a boarding school. 1982 was the Falklands. It was all over the news. We were the type of school where they would come and recruit from pretty heavily. And a lot of the kids there's parents were in the military. So I think that had some influence on me wanting to do that. But also it was about me breaking out of, leaving school and going back to the family and the kind of family roots and doing what everyone else did. So that was a kind of opportunity to break the cycle. What was interesting there, I guess, was I got posted to Northern Ireland for a while, and you kind of do, I don't know, I did sort of 6 months patrolling like everyone else does, and then kind of randomly got plucked out to do this, to go on a selection course really, and then work on the covert side of operations out there. And when I kind of got into that world, it was quite interesting that a lot of the other people there had similar backstories and had similar kind of personalities, because what we were doing effectively was you need an awful lot of patience. We were spending weeks at times living in holes in the ground and all that sort of stuff. So it was interesting how my life kind of got, without consciously choosing it, it kind of got swept along in certain directions. However, I'd always quite fancied joining the police. And I think because, again, it fitted with a kind of purpose of mine that I didn't consciously realize. Also, I wanted to do something. And one of the driving forces is I wanted to do something that made a difference. Now, lots of people say that. Lots of people, you don't have to be in public service to do that. You can be an accountant and want to make a difference. My difference was clearly around helping people feel safer. So that really fitted in with that. I knew I wanted to be a detective. I suppose partly because my favorite TV at the show was probably The Professionals, which was a long time ago. But for those of you who remember it, that's kind of was quite strong in my memory, and I kind of got, again, swept along in that world because I'd come from the sort of covert side of the military. I got opportunities quite early in my career. So you're supposed to spend 2 years in uniform. I spent about 15 months or something, and then I was given my first opportunity to go into the plainclothes environment.
Was that quite a natural transition, sort of military
I
to
felt it was
police?
for me. I felt it was for me. I was used to working in the irony for me is, although I've always been in what you might consider to be disciplined environments, which they were,
Mm.
I've always worked on the fringes of those. I've always worked it in the environments where it's probably more creative, probably more arguably sort of entrepreneurial, and where you're not so regimented by times of being places, or even by calling people by their ranks. I mean, even in the military, in my unit, we didn't use ranks; we used just people's first names. Um,
That is
so
unusual. I mean, not that is quite unusual for the military, right?
yeah, particularly in the guards. I was in a guards regiment, which is kind of uber disciplined.
Mm.
But as soon as you get into what I was doing, it was, first name terms. If you were in front of other people, then we'd obviously call each other by ranks, but otherwise it was very relaxed. We kind of hair was a bit longer, or we didn't have to wear the conventional stuff. We could kind of wear what we wanted when we were being deployed, and so it was much more relaxed. So that seems to be a theme, and I don't, and it's interesting that although I've lived most of my life often in those sort of institutions, I've always enjoyed the freedom, I suppose, of being more flexible and more able to have self-discipline rather than kind of enforced. And actually, when you go through the kind of guards training as I did, and you look back at it as an adult, like I am now, I suppose, you realise that actually what they're not training you to be disciplined. They're training you to be self-disciplined. Because actually, if you have to discipline everyone, something's gone wrong. You get them to a certain standard, and then it's about them staying at that standard themselves. So you get to see that. But in the policing, I kind of drifted from one place, and I ended up in Brixton, which back in the kind of time when I was there was pretty lively. And
Or it was trendy.
well, no, it was lively. It wasn't trendy. It certainly wasn't trendy. I mean, it was there was nothing fashionable about it in those days, and you didn't go there. I mean, I think we had the Brixton Academy, but people would turn up there and literally run from there to the tube station to get out. So it wasn't fashionable. It was it was violent. It was lots of stabbings and shootings and what have you. And it was but if you could cut your teeth there, you could do it anywhere. And so and actually many of the people I work with there went on to do incredible things in policing, and a kind of whole generation it spawned of people that have ended up as chief constables and head of things and all that sort of stuff. So it was an impressive cadre of people I got to work with. And then I spent the next 20 years really kind of doing that, working on murder squads and child abuse teams and terrorism teams. And I suppose a highlight probably was the 2005 London bombings, when they
I remember that.
when things changed quite dramatically in terms of the kind of terrorism threat for us in the UK, where that threat was coming from, the focus of the intelligence services, etc. So again, a good fortune, I guess. They created a joint MI5, MI6 team, and myself and another detective are posted into that team for 2 years to work with them, because the way in which the type of people they were used to working with was different to what the new threat was. And so in those days, quite a lot of the Islamic extremists that were getting drawn into it, a huge proportion were coming from the criminal underworld, who were either from the Islamic community, or they were coming out of prison from a Muslim prison gang. And most of them had become Muslims in prison because they got better food and conditions rather than any kind of religious affiliation, but they'd stayed within that kind of group. And so they weren't used to operating against those sort of targets. And so we were helping them change their tactics and their methodology to deal with those, and also some of the linguistics that were somewhat unusual for them. So did that, and then got promoted a few times. And then 2016 is when again things shifted, when the MP Joe Cox was assassinated, shot down and stabbed in the street, at the beginning of what was the debate around Brexit.
Oh, of course.
And she was I didn't know her. I'm not going to pretend I did, but I know her sister very well, and I've spent a lot of time with Kim, and we've spoken a lot about Joe. And she by all accounts was an incredible woman, and I think would have gone on to be an incredible politician had she had a longer career doing so. But unfortunately for her, she was targeted by an extreme right-wing extremist, a fanatic who was a lone wolf, and targeted her at just outside her constituency surgery, and attacked and killed her and injured a couple of other people.
Of course,
And
this is very much being talked about at the moment with MP security and.
yeah, but a lot of, again, and I'll touch on that because a lot of it is it's an interesting conversation, and it's directed what I do now, so I'll touch on it. But effectively, what happened was Parliament said we want a dedicated team to look at all the threats and the abuse, etc., that we're getting, and we want someone that's dedicated to us, etc. And I was that person that was called in by the head of counterterrorism, who I'd worked with at Brixton 25 years ago. And so, he said to me, "Look, I want you to go and do this, and okay, and I want you to stop the next attack." Right. Okay. Well, sort of, what do we know then? He's like, "Well, we don't know much. We need you to go and find out. We need you to go and investigate all this."
What a remit!
Yeah, it was pretty good, But and I said to him, I remember saying to him, "Is this a rhetorical kind of request, or can I actually make a choice?" And he said, "No, you can make a choice." He said, "But I really think it's you'll be good at this, and I need someone who's strong, who's not going to be bullied by politicians and all that sort of stuff." So I went in. Now, I'd left school at 16 with nothing. And at that point, I was, I suppose, what was I, 4 or 5 years out from, I was about 4 years out from leaving the police. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I need to get some qualifications. So I had opted to do a master's degree in security management, because I didn't want to be just another detective leaving the police. Big deal. You've done loads of good jobs, but so has everyone else. So I was doing I'd be doing my master's for a year or so, and I then looked at my dissertation and I flipped it to look at what I was doing in Parliament, which was, okay, so how are high profile figures targeted? And I had the good fortune to come across some really interesting research, and shortly after was invited out to Harvard University to engage in a conference around female politicians being targeted globally. And there was some fascinating. There was a lady from Mexico, as an example, who was one of the first mayors in Mexico, who was basically given 24 hours to leave the country, or we'll kill everyone in the family. So, what we were dealing with was small cheese compared to, what she was dealing with. But there was a group of female politicians and a group of others that were experts in this field, and me. And one of these people was the person that wrote the kind of research that kicked off everything, and he wrote it for the US Secret Service. And I had become, I'd kind of managed to get him an invitation. And he spent 3 days sitting with me, literally going through his research and teaching me, this is what you need to know. And I'll introduce you to the other people who have taken the research on. So you have that expertise and you have that support as you're doing what you're doing. So I wrote the research based looking at, okay, well, let's look at the attacks we've had since the year 2000 against MPs. And the reason for that is, but prior to the year 2000, the people who were targeting MPs were organised terrorist groups, so the IRA and people like that. Since 2000, they've been lone actors, and organised terrorist groups have not been involved. Now, you probably will hear, various people saying, "Oh, yeah, but I'm doing it for ISIS, or I'm doing it for Al Qaeda, or whoever else." Well, they're not. Al Qaeda and ISIS. I've never heard of any of these people, but it's one of the indicators that people associate with various groups. They don't necessarily have to be a member of them. But what's been true is they've all been lone actors. So I did it for this past, what is coming up to 24 years. It was 17 at the time. And there were some common factors. And I was mapping that against this research to say, does that research work in the UK, where we don't have the same sort of levels of violence, etc.? And of course, it absolutely does. And in actual fact, I'm actually rewriting that research based on
For UK context,
that research. Well, it's updating it based on what's happened in the last couple of years. So the last 2 attacks, because there's a specific element of it where one of the kind of godfathers of threat assessment, if you like, in the US, has asked me to write it because it challenges some common theories that people go along with in terms of the inclusion of mental health and everything, and this suggestion that people are mentally ill, and that's simply not the case. So having done that research and looked at it all.
So is this still during your master's, this bit?
Yeah.
That was okay.
Yeah. So I then brought that back into Parliament. You know, I've proved to myself, if you like, that this works, this is applicable. Brought the research back into Parliament, and by this time I'd set up all the processes around the country around managing the threats to MPs. I mean, a whole load of processes that, working with all the social media companies and investigating. I'd increased reporting by politicians by 400%. So all of a sudden they were telling us everything, and we were getting a much clearer picture of the nature and types of threats, the volatility of those threats, where they were coming from and the reasons why. And it was fluctuating slightly because we had the input of then Jeremy Corbyn, who came in as the leader of the Labour Party. That changed some of the targeting of MPs, etc. But the common denominators of the methodology was the same. And then what happened was, in about late 2017, I think it might have been, I was sat in my office when one evening when one of the MPs came in. So she was a really fantastic MP. She was previously associated with a charity called Hope Not Hate. And she gave me a bit of paper with 7 lines on it. And she said, "Look, Philip, this has come directly from Hope Not Hate. They think they've got someone working inside a terrorist group who's going to kill an MP. Can I give you this piece of paper?" And I say, "Yeah, of course you can." Now, we were getting similar notes, should we say, fairly routinely from various organizations and various sources of information. And we were getting hundreds and hundreds of threats every day across the country directed at MPs. But I was able to look at this piece of paper, which had 7 lines on it. And based on that research that I'd done and the research that the US Secret Service had, was able to literally go, yep, tick, tick, tick. That's the next attack. So I remember phoning up the head of domestic counterterrorism, because it was a domestic terrorist group.
But you're filtering from hundreds of different.
Yeah. And that's the skill around differentiating between those that make threats and those that actually pose threats. That's kind of my expertise, if you like. So I remember phoning him up and I said to him, "Boss, I've got a job for you." And he said to me, "How do you know it's real?" And I said, "Well, you probably don't know this, but there's these indicators that they use in the US and blah, blah." He said, "Phil, is this some American nonsense you're about to go through?" I said, "Yeah, it is, yeah." And he said, "Okay, well, cut to the chase. I trust you. I know what you're talking about. Tell me what I need to know." And so they took the job on, and it became a huge job. It was an individual from a terrorist group called National Action, which at the time actually experts suggested that posed a greater threat to the UK than ISIS.
What are they?
They're an extreme right wing. They're a prescribed organization now, but they're effectively a fascist, extreme right wing, white supremacist terrorist group.
Wow. Anders Breivik type thing.
Yeah. I mean, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it was the climate of Tommy Robinson and all that type of stuff. And if we look at the attacks on MPs, with the exception of the very first one, because that was a man who was significantly mentally ill, the other attacks have been either extremist Islamists or extremist right wing. That's the kind of either one or the other. And he fitted that one. And actually, his intention was to kidnap Rosie Cooper, the MP, and also call in a WPC, a female police officer that had been investigating him for downloading child pornography. And he intended then to kill them both, and then, in his word, martyr himself. So suicide by cop. But thankfully, the counter-terrorist team got to him first, and he was arrested and charged, and he stood trial for that and for being a member of a prescribed organization, as did a whole load of other people. And he was convicted and got life, with a minimum of 20 years. He also got convicted of his child pornography charges. So as a result of that, I then started getting a lot of people coming to me and saying, "Right, okay, so how did you do that then?" And
good day at the office. I mean,
not bad. Yeah, it was a joint effort. When I remember going to Rosie, with one of my guys on my team who's a brilliant guy, and I won't name him because he may not want me to name him. But he, and sitting there in front of Rosie and telling her there's a threat against your life. And that was quite, when you have to do that, it's not easy, because it's real and it's somebody's life, and you see the fear. And to me, it's my job. To her, it's her life. and she'd done nothing. She hadn't said anything, she hadn't done anything, and this fitted all in with the research that we'd done around why are people attacked, which I'll touch on. But what was happening is that all of a sudden the world is wife is saying, can you help me? And the argument I had was, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm contracted to work for Parliament and MPs only. So that was when really the idea about me going out my own and becoming a consultant came to the forefront. And, and that's where I decided that's what we're going to do. And then it was a case of, okay, well, what does that look like and what we're going to call it?
So was that towards the end of your stint at the Met then with her?
Yeah, sorry. For some reason, you've gone quiet on me. I can't see why.
I was just saying, was this towards the end of your stint at the Met?
I don't know why, but my microphone's gone dead. Can you hear me? You can still hear me, thankfully. That's all I can. Okay, good. So that's what happened. I left the police and I'll try and get this working and started Defuse. And that.
So I was saying, was that towards, so with that MP, was that towards the end of your time with the Met?
Yeah, that was 2017, I think. So I still had 18 months left and what have you. And we tried to change a lot of things around what we were doing. The challenge we had and the challenge that still exists within Parliament is that politics gets involved. And so they don't always want to listen to the truth because it doesn't always fit the narrative. And so you
think I mean, what politics is there? If it's a security opinion or perspective. It's across, there's no party politics involved. I wouldn't have thought, they're all in the same boat.
No, there is, because you see, at the time, as an example, so I used to report to the deputy. I didn't report to him. I used to brief the deputy speaker on a regular basis. So the deputy speaker, in order to become the speaker, they had to get voted in by other MPs. And so the deputy speaker's campaign was based on security. And his campaign was basically, I'm going to give you everything you want. At the time, I was running the National Protective Security package. And we don't give them what they want. We gave them what they needed. And there's a real difference between that. And mindful that you and I fund that scheme. It's when the government hand out, as they are, 31 million, they forget to tell everyone it's 31 million of our money. So, we were not going to give them what they wanted. We were going to give them what they needed to keep safe. What he was saying is, I'll give you what you want. So politics started coming into it. And there were things that were promised and what have you, which were of no value and which we're still talking about now, and 31 million still talks about it, which will not keep any of them safer, but it makes good headlines and it appeases people. So I have been on Sky News, as an example, I think 3 times in the last couple of weeks. I've been on other news programs, arguing the same case because I'm have a degree of expertise around it all. And so what people have to understand is there is hugely proven research around the fact that there is a huge difference between those people that make threats and those people that pose a threat. What 99.9% of politicians and celebrities and business leaders and everyone else get is communicated abuse and threats.
You talked about this. It's a slightly different context, but I think your podcast was it Lorraine Sheridan?
Yeah.
I think you were talking about this quite a bit on that.
Yeah.
And
so what happens is that those people that do that, and you can call them trolls for want of a better word, they're the people on social media, etc., and all other places. And interestingly, Parliament again, they were very dominant about talking about social media. Actually, less than 14% of all the abuse they get is actually on social media. But because social media was a political hot potato at the time, they were pumping out this rhetoric around it's all about social media. And I was saying, no, it's not. It's actually coming in by other means, but that's not really topical. So again, this is where politics comes in. But when we look at the trolls compared to the people that actually attack, and this is the same for whether you are whether you are a member of Parliament or whether you are a business leader or whoever else, the people that are abusing and threatening and all that, they are doing that to cause you fear. They're doing it to make you, to intimidate you, to threaten you, to abuse you. They are not going to attack. And actually the research, when we did 50 years of research in the US looking at all the attacks on presidents and judges and all those sort of people. And then they replicated it in Germany around politicians. And then I did it in the UK about our politicians. The one common denominator is those people that have been attacked were not in any way directly threatened by the person that attacked them.
God, it's terrifying.
So the idea that somebody who is abusing and threatening and everything else you is going to attack you is almost never going to happen. It's kind of less than 5% chance. And yet, even yesterday, I was watching the news and an MP was on there talking about, we are in mortal danger. These people are threatening us. So the narrative that we taught them back in 2018, they've ignored because it doesn't often suit them. Politics needs oxygen of publicity. And so they, unfortunately, would misconstrue stories that were not accurate to get that publicity. The reality is, when we look at, so the news recently was that 3 female MPs, as an example, were getting close protection. And my argument was, that's a waste of money. And the argument for that is this: if you look at all the MPs that have been attacked, not one of those was high profile. Not one of those has done or said or behaved in a way that would attract attention to them. And yet they were attacked. And the reason is because the target of the next attack is not about the Member of Parliament. It's about the attacker. Because every MP's been attacked by a local constituent. The reason being is that fixated people and people that are targeting you, they want proximity. That's what they desire. They want to get close to you. And if they're going to attack you, they need to get close to you. But what they also need is to know where you're going to be at a certain point. They need that certainty. So the only way they know that is that you're going to be at a constituency meeting at a certain time because you advertise it. They're not going to come to your home and attack you because they never know when you're going to be there. So even though we had recently the protest group outside Tobias Ellwood's house, they didn't know whether he was there or not. That wasn't the point. It was a symbolic protest around, we're going to do it outside an MP's house. If they actually want to attack you, they need the certainty you're going to be somewhere. It's like a hitman. A hitman's not going to just kind of wander around hoping you turn up in Sainsbury's and then hit you. They're going to make sure they target you in a specific location. And if we look at all the attacks that we've had, each and every one of them, with the exception of David Amess, and I'll touch on that why, has been attacked by a local constituent about a geopolitical issue. And they've targeted their local MP because they feel they're a representation of the state. Now, the David Amess attack was different because as an MP, you should only meet your local constituents. If you email your MP, he'll reply to you saying, if you're not my local constituent, I'm not going to speak to you.
Yeah.
David Amess ignored that and allowed somebody who wasn't a local constituent to come and see him. Secondly, he actually declined to input any of the security or the guidance or advice we'd given him for whatever reason. So, we know that actually every MP is at equal risk. If you're going to start giving protection to people because they're getting more threats, that's the wrong way to look at it. What we need to do is educate people that the people that are threatening them are not going to be necessarily violent towards them. Yes, I understand 100%. And my business threat line, if you like, is feel safer. And it's because it's very easy to make somebody safe. To actually help you feel safer, you need to do different things. And so what we failed at is making MPs feel safer because they feel unsafe because of all the abuse and threats, as do celebrities, as do business leaders. And so we need to educate people on, well, where is the real threat coming from? And actually, all these trolls and what have you, what they're doing is trying to intimidate you. And so let's educate you so that they don't intimidate you and actually put things in place so that they can't intimidate you, rather than spreading fear and saying in the House of the Parliament, I'm terrified every morning I wake up, there might be another attack. Because actually we look at it, we've had 2 attacks really in 24 years. That's a low likelihood of it happening. High impact when it does, but low likelihood. So the idea that people are waking up every day terrified they're going to be attacked, well, someone's misbriefing them about the level of threat they're under.
It is. Is there anyone that is receptive to what you're saying in that regard about what they?
Yeah, there are plenty of MPs who I speak to directly. There are plenty of MPs who will come to me when they get threats. There are plenty of MPs that want the system change within Parliament. But unfortunately, it's about getting heard in the right places. Which is why I tend not to deal with MPs. I tend to deal with private clients and organisations, because actually they come to me because they want the problem solved. And so it's less about politics and more about I want this solved. I want this resolved.
Well, I suppose that segues quite nicely then. So talking about MPs, you had that experience in the Met of dealing with it specifically, but then 2019 comes along. Presumably you were thinking about setting up on your own long before you actually did. And what was it that sort of triggered, actually there are people and these skills and this, the threat assessment, the procedure for it completely translates far beyond sort of government and police setting. It transfers into a private client setting.
Yeah, I mean, in 2019, social media was the hot topic around celebrities and other people being threatened, abused on there. Very sadly, shortly after I retired from the police, we had the suicide of the lady who was doing Caroline, who was doing Love Island, and again, that was all circulated around the sort of social media abuse, etc. So that was the initial kind of starting point. But in actual fact, I got a phone call a week after I retired to say, we're protecting this particular individual, someone with globally known by one name, and we're getting death threats. Can you come and help us? And that's really how we started. And we're able to assess those threats and say, no, they're not real, but this is the person's issues. This is the threat this person poses to you, the security, rather than the principal. And we kind of started on that way. And we've pivoted and evolved over the years in terms of, we provide a very bespoke service around what's called protective intelligence and behavioral threat management. And we do it predominantly with private clients and corporate clients who are receiving threats or want to put in place processes to prevent them being targeted. And this works very much as also, we're doing a lot of work around this in the commercial sector around work-related violence. So we've seen over the last couple of years instances where we've got McDonald's, we've got Tesco's, we've got the CBI, who've had historical cases of toxic behaviour happening in their workplaces. And so when you look at Parliament, it's a giant workplace violence scheme. Basically, that's what I set up and ran. And so we're doing similar things now in organisations to say the sticking plaster method that you put in place doesn't work. You can have the best policies you like in the world around workplace violence or around what have you, but actually none of that has any impact because when people are in those moments, well, firstly, no one reads the policies. I have CEOs of global brands, the head of HR phoning me up and telling me, can you help us? And we've got a policy in place. And I say, okay, what does the policy say? And even they can't tell you. So policies are great for insurance, but they don't actually have any impact on what happens. And so we have got research processes that go on the back of behavioral science and behavioral threat management, that we look at behaviors and we look at the reasons why 80% of incidents within the workplace go unreported. And there are clear reasons for that. And so we can tackle those reasons and we can then help increase reporting for you, which is going to protect the reputation of your organization, but also the bottom line. Because when Tesco's gets in the news because their chairman's done something, or when Red Bull are in the news right now, the share price drops quite often because and all the research is investors don't want to be associated with companies that are getting that such negative reputational news. So actually we can change that by increasing the reporting. And there's a difference between, again, those problems that are supervisory issues, shall we say, and those problems that are actually behavioral issues. And whenever we have an incident in the workplace, whether it's in the US where we have the mass shootings, or in the UK where we have, historical and ongoing toxic problems, someone will always say after the fact, yeah, that person is always a bit odd. Okay, so why don't you tell anyone? And this is the whole problem, that people know who these people are. They either don't know where to report their concerns, they don't know what concerns to report, they are concerned about the seriousness of their concerns being investigated properly, but they're also concerned about the repercussions of those reports. And if you take the Red Bull case, we can see all four of those. A female, and we don't know the rights and wrongs of it, and I'm not making any judgment on anyone involved, but a female has reported it. It's been investigated, and a decision has been made in favour of the boss. Somebody is clearly unhappy with that investigation because they've leaked all the data. Now, the woman who's made the report is suffering repercussions by being suspended. Now, the rights and wrongs of those actually become irrelevant in the big picture, because what actually happens is the narrative gets sent out there is this what's happened. This is what happens when you report a powerful person.
I see.
And so what will happen is, I can almost guarantee is other people within organizations will think, I'm not going to do that because look what happened to her. And so what tends to happen is either problems fester and they escalate and get worse, or good people leave the organization because they just think, I don't need to be here. I can go and get a job somewhere else. So we need to tackle these issues because the climate is changing, and what perhaps was okay 5-10 years ago in terms of workplace behavior isn't anymore, and it probably won't be, even less so in 3 or 5 years' time. So we've got the processes, we've got proven research behaviors that we introduce to say, this is what you report, this is how you report it. And then we train people how to triage that so that they can tell the difference between what's supervisory, if you like, and what actually is an escalating problem. And then if need be, we can go in and deal with those more serious cases where there is genuine issues there and genuine threats or fears. So it's taking the same methodology around accurate intelligence about what people are up to. And so some of our clients will say to us, I'm about to employ someone. Tell me everything I need to know about this person. And we'll tell them what things they don't know. Things such as, did you know their child's an activist? Did you know that actually they're campaigning against the very things that your company represent? You may, that may be okay to you. It may not be, but that's for you to make the decision. Did you know that actually he or she, plays golf on a weekend with a Chinese business person? Those are the sort of things now that people are looking at in terms of the geopolitical issues. I think, is there a risk about employing this individual at this level? We're talking about more senior levels.
Yeah.
But equally, again, do I want that person working for me? What's the inside threat around that? What are the risks about employing that person? Are there dangers of me recruiting that person? And equally about, we've done a few for a hedge fund as an example. They've asked us, anyone who wants to invest, we want to know all about them before they invest.
Oh, really? On the investment side?
That's because what they say is we don't want any reputational harm to our investment fund or to our other investors. So what we don't want is someone who's coming in as an investor who suddenly we find out is, I don't know, pumping out hate on social media or something. So
and then it affects other investors and reputational damage. And
so we're doing that kind of protective intelligence piece there. But where there are issues, we're dealing with those issues from a behavioral threat basis. And so really understanding, okay, and we use forensic psychology and we do profiling on people to say, here's a person that's causing you problems. He's unwanted attention. And I say he, but I mean he or she. Who is this person? What is their personality? If you take stalkers as an example, there are 5 different types of stalkers. So you need to understand, well, which type of stalker are we dealing with? Because if you get it wrong, and you've got an 80% chance of getting it wrong, the problem escalates. So you need to tackle it scientifically before you sort of make an assumption that stalkers are stalkers and that's all they are. So that's what we do. We bring that scientific and proven methodology into the workplace. Yes, can we bring other security assets in? Yes, we can, if we need to, in terms of do you need to be looked after properly? Do you need more security? We've got crisis management teams that come in, etc., and look at the communication strategy, etc. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is create that environment where individuals or groups feel safer.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the people in our network. So you might have sort of people. I mean, certainly they may not be politically exposed or anything, but you'll have advisors dealing with certainly wealthier individuals, some very high net worth, particularly if you're in the sort of family office space or high-end investment management or legal services for that matter. At what point, should someone in those sectors what would be a prompt that they might hear in a meeting or some other setting with their client or their client's advisors that should prompt people to think about what you guys offer?
Well, there's 2 sides to that, really. The first side is we would say be proactive and get ahead of the game. Because one of the services that we provide is a vulnerability assessment. And so what we do is we'll act as an adversary effectively. And if you were our client, what we would do is we would go and investigate you on the deep web, the dark web, all that sort of stuff. And we'd find out everything we can find about you. Can we find your home address? Can we find the plans of your home? Can we find where your family, live and go to school, etc.? What can we find out about you? A lot of reputational companies sell this myth that no one looks beyond page 2 of Google. That's true if you're looking for a plumber. It's not true if you're looking to target somebody. It's complete nonsense. And so, you need to know what's out there about you. So we'll do that deep dive investigation and we'll produce a report for you to say, here's where you're exposed. Now, the reason why that's important is if someone locks onto you, they'll do that research. So you need to do it ahead of the game. Otherwise, they'll get that data. And as an example, we've had global CEOs we've worked with who say, I got a phone call at 3 a.m. from an angry client, one of our customers. And I said, where'd you get my phone number from? He said, oh, it was on the internet. And all of a sudden, they've got your number and they're bombarding you with messages and phone calls because they have a grievance against the company. The fact the chief executive wasn't even there when this grievance started is irrelevant to him. Again, it's a figurehead to the organization. So if you get ahead of the game, which is what we would recommend always, then we can eradicate an awful lot of those risks straight away. However, to your question, what we're dealing with is disputes. And most disputes and if we go to the most extreme end around the kind of serious violence, it starts with a grievance. So everything that we deal with starts with some form of grievance. And it's about how that grievance escalates. And what happens often is they will look at their grievance, and when they realize that they cannot resolve their grievance peacefully, that's when they resort to other means. Now, at the most extreme end, that's violence. But it can also be, reputationally damaging you, targeting your reputation, targeting you psychologically, targeting your family, making threats, all those sorts of things. So, if there is a grievance, then you need to think about, well, actually, how much of a threat is that person posing our company or me personally? Because, thankfully, a lot of people will just get over it, or you can pacify them, but there will be those that won't. And as we get into an increasingly kind of binary world where you're either right or wrong these days, there's no kind of middle ground anymore. And we're seeing the kind of geopolitical scenarios escalating around the world. I think we're going to see more and more of these type of grievances. I think we're going to see more and more hostility towards senior figures.
Yeah.
We're seeing, if we look at the first attack on an MP as an example, he was attacked. He was a middle-class man that was doing really well, and the recession hit. And as the recession hit and he lost everything, he got mentally unwell. And he blamed everyone. He blamed the utility companies, he blamed the mortgage company, blamed all these people for his financial losses. And eventually decided that his MP was part of the conspiracy. And so that's where he went to attack him.
But probably wouldn't appear on traditional screens of likely.
No. But we have this quite often where we'll get somebody who is targeting a company or an organization because they have a grievance about something. It might be a past employee. It might be an angry customer. So what we are suggesting is, get a proper assessment of who that person is and a proper strategy about how to deal with that person based on that person's psychology. Because if you're not careful, the way in which you engage or communicate, there's a very strong likelihood it will escalate things rather than, dare I say it, diffuse things.
Like it.
Well, that's what we call the business diffuse. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to diffuse problems.
No, it's I've heard over the years, I've heard lots of reasons for names of companies, but I must admit, I particularly liked the choice of Defuse. I thought it was very apt. Quickly, just off that subject, just a quick from a business point of view, because obviously you went from very well-established organizations in sort of, particularly with the Met, and then you set up on your own. I mean, yeah. I didn't quite do the same thing, but I was at sort of a large investment bank and then started working in a small family business and then set up private client network. How did you find that transition from the Met to doing your own thing?
Well, hard, because I have, I would argue I've still got very little real commercial experience. And, you can be the best thing since sliced bread, but if no one knows about you, then who cares?
Yeah.
I think what happened, though, is I started just as COVID hit. And dare I say, I think that worked in my favor, because all of a sudden, I was able to really get onto LinkedIn and work LinkedIn. And I was able to engage with people and arrange, Zoom meetings like this with people who I probably would never normally have managed to make those connections because they were busy at work. Suddenly they're sat at home and people were engaged, were prepared to have a 15-minute Zoom call.
Yeah.
So I worked that really hard, and you know, I met lots of wonderful people, and you know, I'm very lucky that I picked up a couple of very wealthy business people who I gave them my services, and they kind of coached me and mentored me on what I should be doing, which was a great opportunity for me. I was very lucky that because of the story and what have you, I've always had free publicity. You know, I've had half a dozen interviews on Sky News, I've done ITV, BBC, I've done various talk shows, been invited on shows by MPs to debate various things. So that's given me a lot of exposure. You know, what we do is quite unique in the UK in terms of the way we operate. A lot of our tactics and methodology are very common in the US because of the level of violence. We've adapted those over here to acknowledge the level of violence and the fear of violence, but tackle the reputational, psychological issues that people have. And it's a constant battle. I mean, you know, it's, you know yourself, if you run your own business, as you don't, you know, you don't take your foot off the pedals because suddenly you get you know, some success. You've got to be strategic. But I think there's lots of skills that I brought out of my previous careers in terms of, you know, being very strategic. I was obviously managing a large team, so I've got some sort of management experience. I used to have to sell myself. And certainly previous roles, which I won't necessarily go into, you know, I had to very much sell myself in terms of persuade people that why they should buy into me and all that sort of stuff. So there were some elements of previous roles, etc. But I've had to learn a great deal. I've got bookshelves full of books on small business startups and, you know, what to do and how to do and marketing and all that. I've made some huge mistakes and wasted money on marketing ideas that had no impact at all. So it's been a journey, but I've really enjoyed it. We've been very fortunate that we've been really successful. We've pivoted, I think, where we had to pivot to be more commercial. So sometimes I think you know, I really love doing this, but, you know, actually that's the more commercial angle of it. So we're gonna sort of shift into that world. So I think, you know, you have to be flexible, you have to be disciplined, you have to be focused. I think some of those qualities, you know, come from other careers. And I think if you are honest about your lack of experience in certain areas and you are inquisitive enough about that, I think people will be receptive to that. I've you know, some of my clients are self-made billionaires who you know, done it themselves, and I have really good conversations about, so how did you do that then? Or I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? And they said, don't do that, that's nonsense, you're going to waste your money. And I always find the really successful people like that are really willing to help and give you advice and steer you in the right direction, because they probably had a mentor as well.
And they would have come up through a different system. They were, you know, they might have come up through finance or PR and marketing. So they just, you know, they just completely fluent in that language of what, and they can see through problems very, very quickly in the way that you can see through problems in your area.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And, you know, people like yourselves, I mean, you know, I've joined, you know, your network and other networks because, again, it isn't just about meeting people, it's about learning from other people. And some of the people I've met through the various networks I work with have become mentors to me and have you know, been really good at introducing me to various organizations and sometimes building those bridges on my behalf where I may not have the skill set to do certain things. But I do think, you know, the power of network is the key thing, which is why I've, you know, become a member of your network, and you can't do it in isolation. It's however you look at it, it's a team sport. And so, you know, and it isn't about, you know, I'm a friend of mine who runs a huge network, you know, says it's all about we, not me. And you know, when you sit down and just talk to people, not about business, but just get to know people, and you understand who they are and what they are and what their passions and purpose, etc. Then when somebody else says, actually, I'm looking for this person, you can join those dots. And I think, you know, the more you give, the more you get. And you know, I love talking to the various people in different networks because I meet people I would never normally meet. They may have absolutely zero business connection with me and never will do business with me, but it's still something I can learn from, you know, what their businesses are, or what do they do, or how do you achieve that, or what sort of problems do you get?
You can never predict as well. What I've found is sometimes you might go to something with no clear idea in advance who you're going to meet, but then you just meet someone that is just so right on the money for whatever situation you're currently in, whether it is complimentary that, you know, you've got a client need that needs to be fulfilled, or you fulfill that need for them. And it's great when it happens. It's very hard to predict it in advance, but it's very satisfying when you make those connections.
Yeah. And also I've been very fortunate that I've got some good speaking opportunities and you know, publication opportunities through some of those meetings. So last year I think I went to 4 countries to speak, because I've got probably a different story and a different perspective. And we've done some big business conferences as well, where we can talk about some of the stories that we talk about from a different in a business context and from a different viewpoint. And I think that plays in my strengths, is that because I don't come from a commercial world, I don't have preset ideas either. So I sometimes will ask the questions, or sometimes I'll do things that might not be commercially normal, but they work because I'm not doing what everyone else does, or I'm not, this isn't how we do things. Well, I'm going to have to give it a go anyway. And I think by being a bit different, sometimes that plays to my strengths. But I still have, obviously, there's lots to learn about.
Yeah, that, and the great deal of experience that you've got in what you do as well. That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be good at what you do. Still, I mean, no one, stories are going to take you so far. Ultimately, when you get in there and you've got to better produce the goods and solve the problem or move the dial, certainly. So yeah, of course you have. But I think there's so much sameness out there that when you get something that's a bit different, it's just a bit more interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree, but appreciate. It's been great having you on. I mean, part of the reason sort of I contacted you is because, well, you've joined the membership of Private Client Network, which is lovely, and we're going to try and highlight members as much as we can. But also just the experience you've got in the career you've had, it really is quite different to some. Predominantly we draw members and attendees from investment, legal, financial services, tax advisory type stuff. So, what you're doing is really quite interesting. So really appreciate having you on. Thanks for your time. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure.
Cool. Thanks a lot. And I'm sure I'll catch you at another event soon.
Very soon, hopefully. Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.